Poor woman rescued the knight from drowning. Next day, he made her his lady. The church bell tolls at dawn. A poor washerwoman bends over the river, her hands raw from the cold, when suddenly a knight in armor crashes into the raging waters. Against all odds, she drags him to shore, saving his life. The very next day, before the eyes of the whole village, the knight declares, "This humble washerwoman shall be his lady." Gasps fill the square. Nobles whisper in outrage. Villagers shake their heads in fear. But shadows gather. A false contract. A cruel cousin's plot. And before long, chains rattle as the poor woman is dragged to prison accused of witchcraft. She never worked. Now the stakes could not be higher. Will her courage and kindness be enough to shatter the walls of class and cruelty? Or will love itself drown beneath the weight of scandal? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Dawn painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold as Marjorie Holt pushed open her cottage door. The morning air bit at her skin, still holding winter's chill despite spring's arrival. She gathered her washing bundle, the familiar weight of linens pressed against her chest as she made her way to the river's edge. The previous night's storm had left its mark. Branches littered the muddy path, and the usually gentle river rushed past with angry force, its waters brown and swollen. Marjorie's raw, reddened fingers trembled as she set down her basket on a relatively dry patch of earth. "Lord above, give mass strength," she whispered, dipping a sheet into the icy current. The cold water stung her hands, but she had known worse. The rhythmic sound of wet fabric slapping against rocks filled the morning air as she worked, her movements practiced and efficient. A sudden commotion broke through her concentration, the thunder of hooves and a horse's frightened whinny. Marjorie looked up to see a magnificent black stallion charging along the riverbank, its rider struggling to maintain control. The horse reared, its iron-shod hooves pawing at the air. Time seemed to slow as she watched the rider, resplendent in gleaming armor, tumble from his saddle. The weight of his mail dragged him under almost instantly as he struck the rushing water. Marjorie didn't hesitate. "Help!" she called out, her voice carrying across the fields as she waded into the current. The icy water grabbed at her skirts, trying to pull her off balance, but she pressed forward. When the water reached her waist, she took a deep breath and dove. The current tried to sweep her away. The Marjorie had grown up by this river. She knew its moods, its depths, its secrets. Her hands found metal, a gauntlet, and she pulled with all her might. The night was heavy, his armor weighing them both down. But desperation lent her strength. Her lungs burned as she fought against the current, kicking hard to keep them both above water. "Please," she gasped between breaths. "Hold fast." Just when her strength began to fail, she heard shouting from the bank. Thomas, the miller's son, was running toward them, his strong arms reaching out. Together, they managed to drag the unconscious knight onto the muddy shore. "Sir Alaric," Thomas exclaimed, recognizing the nobleman's face beneath his helm. "By heaven's grace, it's Sir Alaric de Morville." Marjorie's trembling fingers worked quickly to unfasten the knight's armor, letting the water drain away. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue. "He's not breathing," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Years of caring for the sick had taught her what to do. She pressed firmly on his chest, again and again, until suddenly Sir Alaric coughed, water spilling from his mouth as he gasped for air. His eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling shade of green. "Rest easy, my lord," Marjorie soothed, though her own teeth chattered from cold. "You're safe now." Thomas had already run to fetch help from the manor, and soon more servants arrived with a makeshift stretcher. They lifted Sir Alaric carefully, his wet armor gleaming dully in the morning light. The woman, Sir Alaric managed to rasp, his eyes seeking Marjorie. Her name. But they were already carrying him away, leaving Marjorie standing alone by the rushing river, her clothes soaked through, her body trembling with exhaustion and cold. The sun was setting by the time Marjorie finally returned home, her laundry bundle somehow still intact despite the day's events. Her muscles ached fiercely, and her fingers were blue with cold, but her heart was light. She had seen the color return to Sir Alaric's face before they carried him away. He would. Live, kneeling beside her small hearth, Marjorie closed her eyes. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for giving me the strength to save him." The dying sunlight painted her humble cottage in shades of gold, and despite her weariness, a small smile graced her lips, grateful that the day's peril had ended well morning. Dew still clung to the grass as Marjorie gathered her laundry lines by the riverside. Her arms ached from yesterday's rescue, but duty called her back to her daily task. The rushing waters had calmed somewhat since yesterday's tempest, though they still ran swift and deep. She hummed softly to herself, reaching for a dampened sheet, when the sound of hoofbeats made her pause. The rhythmic thud grew louder, accompanied by the jingle of metal and leather. Shading her eyes against the morning sun, she saw a group of riders approaching along the river path. At their head rode a tall figure she recognized, Sir Alaric de Morville, now properly attired in fine clothing, rather than sodden armor. His bearing was proud atop his fresh mount, though she noticed he sat somewhat stiffly, no doubt still feeling the effects of his near drowning. 4 retainers followed close behind, their livery bearing the de Morville crest. Marjorie's hands trembled as she clutched her basket closer. She dropped into a quick curtsy, keeping her eyes lowered as custom demanded. "Good morrow, my lord," she murmured. Instead of passing by, the party drew to a halt. Sir Alaric's boots struck the ground with purpose, and to her astonishment, he strode directly toward her. "You there, Marjorie Holt," he called out, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Pray, accompany us to the market square." Several villagers had already gathered for their morning trading, and more emerged from their shops and homes at the commotion. Marjorie felt her cheeks grow warm as curious eyes turned their way. With little choice, she followed the mounted party, her worn shoes barely keeping pace with the horses. Measured steps, the market square slowly filled with onlookers, women pausing in their shopping, craftsmen stepping away from their work, children darting between the adults for a better view. The morning bustle quieted to hushed whispers as Sir Alaric dismounted once more, his movements deliberate and graceful despite his recent ordeal. What happened next would be talked about in Wycliffe for years to come. Before the gathered crowd, Sir Alaric de Morville, nobleman of ancient lineage and considerable wealth, went down on one knee before Marjorie Holt, the humble washerwoman. "Good people of Wycliffe," his voice rang out clear and strong. "Yesterday, this woman saved my life at great risk to her own. When others might have turned away, she plunged into dangerous waters without hesitation." He turned to face Marjorie directly, his eyes intense. Such courage and nobility of spirit must not go unrecognized. Father Thomas, who had emerged from the church to investigate the commotion, let out an audible cough of astonishment. Several women pressed their hands to their mouths in shock as Sir Alaric continued. "From this day forward," he declared boldly, his voice carrying across the now silent square, "Marjorie Holt shall be my lady. None shall treat her with anything less than the respect due to one under my personal protection." Marjorie's worn basket slipped from nerveless fingers, spilling clean linens onto the cobblestones. She stared at the nobleman before her, scarcely able to breathe. This could not be real. Surely she was still abed, lost in some fever dream. The crowd erupted into a storm of whispers. "A washerwoman?" someone hissed. "His lady?" Another voice wondered aloud. Children stood wide-eyed and open-mouthed, while their elders exchanged meaningful glances. Some faces showed scandal, others awe, and more than a few displayed naked envy. Sir Alaric rose smoothly to his feet, seemingly oblivious to the sensation he had caused. He offered Marjorie his arm, a gesture normally reserved for ladies of gentle birth. "Come," he said more softly, for her ears alone. "The manor awaits." Color flooded Marjorie's cheeks as she placed her trembling hand upon his sleeve. One of the retainers hastily gathered her scattered linens, while another collected her fallen basket. As Sir Alaric led her toward the manor gates, the whispers of the crowd followed them like autumn leaves in a swirling wind. Through it all, Marjorie kept her eyes fixed firmly on the ground before her feet, her mind spinning with the morning's extraordinary events. Only yesterday, she had been nothing more than a washerwoman. Now, she walked beside a nobleman toward a future she could never have imagined. The manor solar felt impossibly grand to Marjorie as she perched uncertainly on the edge of a cushioned chair. Tapestries adorned the walls, their rich threads catching the afternoon light. Servants darted past the doorway, stealing glances at her before hurrying away in hushed whispers. A rough spun dress seemed to scratch more than usual against her skin, making her painfully aware of how out of place she was among the polished furniture and gleaming candlesticks. The door burst open with a bang that made Marjorie jump. Lady Beatrice de Morville swept in, her dark skirts rustling with barely contained fury. "What manner of enchantment have you worked upon my brother?" she demanded, her sharp eyes fixed on Marjorie. "None, my lady," Marjorie answered softly, keeping her gaze lowered as befitted her station. "I only did what any Christian soul would do." "Christian soul indeed," Lady Beatrice scoffed. She brandished a handful of letters. "Half the nobles in the Shire write to say Alaric has lost his wits. Lady Ashworth speaks of witchcraft. Lord Pembroke suggests—" She broke off, too incensed to continue. Heavy footsteps in the corridor heralded the arrival of Father Thomas, the village priest. His usually cheerful face was drawn with concern. "Sir Alaric," he addressed the knight who had followed him in, "if marriage is truly your intent, the banns must be read. But I warn you, such a union will bring scandal upon both your noble house and our humble parish." "Then let them be read," Alaric declared firmly. He moved to stand near Marjorie's chair, his presence warm and reassuring. "I care not for scandal." "But you should care for contracts, cousin." The silken voice came from Geoffrey de Morville, who glided into the solar like a shadow. He withdrew a rolled parchment from his sleeve with a flourish. "This document, properly witnessed and sealed, binds you to wed Eleanor of Montfort." Marjorie's heart seemed to stop. She watched as Geoffrey unrolled the contract with deliberate slowness, savoring each moment of discomfort he caused. "The lady brings a dowry of 3 estates," Geoffrey continued smoothly. "Her father, the Earl, would be most displeased to learn his daughter has been set aside for a washerwoman." "I never agreed to this match," Alaric growled, but Geoffrey merely smiled. "Your father signed before his death. The contract is binding." He turned to Lady Beatrice. "Surely you see the wisdom in this alliance. The Montfort connection would restore our family's influence at court." Lady Beatrice's face had grown thoughtful, her earlier anger replaced by calculation. "Eleanor is young, well-bred, and her dowry would repair the east wing... The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows through the solar's windows. Servants entered quietly to light the candles, their eyes carefully averted but their ears straining to catch every word. Marjorie felt the warmth drain from her body, despite the fire crackling in the hearth as darkness gathered outside. She excused herself quietly and slipped into the corridor. The stone walls seemed to amplify the whispers of passing servants. "Geoffrey means to prove her false," one maid hissed to another. Says he'll find witnesses to swear she pushed Sir Alaric into the river herself, hoping to trap him into marriage. He'll drive her out before the week's end, came the reply. Mark my words. Marjorie pressed herself into an alcove, her heart pounding. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, but the shadow of betrayal that loomed over her felt far darker and more threatening. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling more alone in this grand house than she ever had in her humble cottage by the river. The morning light crept through the windows of Marjorie's small cottage as she gathered her meager belongings. Her fingers traced the worn wooden table where she had shared countless meals with her parents before the plague took them. Outside, the usual cheerful greetings of neighbors had turned to weighted silence. Through her small window, she could see Mrs. Cooper, who once praised her healing poultices, hurriedly usher her children to the other side of the dirt path. Thomas the baker, who had always given her day-old bread in exchange for mending, now turned his back as she stepped outside with her bundle. "She bring the noble's wrath upon us all," whispered one woman loudly enough for Marjorie to hear. The words stung, but she held her head high as her mother had taught her. The sound of hoofbeats drew every eye in the village. Sir Alaric rode through the morning mist, his presence causing the villagers to scatter like leaves in the wind. He dismounted with grace, his boots clicking against the packed earth as he approached her door. "My lady," he said softly, bowing as if she were already a noble woman. The gesture made her cheeks warm. "Sir Alaric," she answered, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "I have but few things to gather." He followed her inside, ducking beneath the low doorframe. His fine clothes looked out of place among her simple furnishings. Yet his eyes held no judgment as they swept the room. "You lived here alone?" he asked, noting the single bed, the carefully mended curtains, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters. "Since the fever took my parents 3 winters past," Marjorie replied, folding her mother's shawl with careful hands. "The village helped when they could, and I earned my way with washing and healing." Alaric's expression softened. "Your courage shows in more than just rushing into rivers to save foolish knights." He stepped closer, his voice earnest. "The manor has many who would whisper against you. I would see you safe within its walls." "Safety at such a price," Marjorie murmured, thinking of Lady Beatrice's scorn. "Your world is not mine, Sir Alaric." "Perhaps it should be both our worlds," he answered, helping her gather the last of her belongings. The carriage ride to the manor stretched longer than any journey Marjorie had known. Through the window, she watched the familiar cottages and gardens of her village life fade into the distance. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. "Dignity comes not from fine clothes or grand houses, but from a true heart." "Please guide my steps," she whispered, her prayer barely audible above the carriage wheels. "Let me bring no shame to either his name or my own." Evening found Marjorie in chambers, grander than any she had imagined. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on tapestried walls. Lady Beatrice entered without knocking, her face stern but less hostile than before. "Stand straight," she commanded, circling Marjorie like a hawk. A lady never slouches, no matter her fatigue. Her hands adjusted Marjorie's posture with surprising gentleness. "I fear I shall disappoint you," Marjorie admitted honestly. "I know nothing of being a lady." "Yet you know of honor," Lady Beatrice replied unexpectedly. "I have made inquiries. During the fever, when others fled, you stayed to tend the sick. When the miller's wife died, you raised funds for her burial. These are not the actions of a common schemer." Marjorie blinked back tears at the memories. They needed help. "I could do no less." "Perhaps," Lady Beatrice said slowly, "that is the beginning of nobility." She straightened Marjorie's shoulders again. "Now, we shall start with the proper way to enter a room. Watch closely." As the fire warmed the chamber, Lady Beatrice demonstrated. the intricate steps of courtly behavior. Marjorie followed, stumbling at first but improving with each attempt. Though the older woman's corrections remained sharp, there was a growing undertone of respect in her voice. "You learn quickly," Lady Beatrice observed as the lesson drew to a close. "Tomorrow we shall address table manners. Heaven knows you'll need them." Marjorie caught the ghost of a smile on the lady's face as she swept from the room, and felt a small spark of hope warm her heart. The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the apple trees. As Belle's small spark of hope warm her heart. The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the apple trados, and a smile to the apple trobuk in her heart. The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the apple shadows. Alaric led Marjorie through the manor gardens. Her eyes widened at the sight of neatly arranged flower beds and meticulously pruned hedges, so different from the wild herbs that grew near her cottage. "These are York roses," Alaric explained, gesturing to pristine white blooms. "And here, the red Lancaster roses. Together, they tell the story of peace after long years of war." His voice carried the warmth of shared knowledge rather than condescension. Marjorie bent to inhale the sweet fragrance. "They are beautiful, my lord. Though I confess, I know better the simpler herbs that heal. Chamomile for sleep, lavender for fever. Please, when we are alone, call me Alaric." His smile softened his noble bearing. "And your knowledge of healing plants is far more valuable than these purely ornamental blooms." They continued walking, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. Near the herb garden, Marjorie identified several plants, explaining their uses. Alaric listened intently, his respect evident in his attentive gaze. Later, in the manor's small library, Alaric retrieved a leather-bound book of Psalms. "I thought we might read together," he said, settling beside her at the window seat. The afternoon light illuminated the gilded pages as he opened the book. Marjorie's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the elaborate script. "I can read simple letters, my lord." "Alaric, but these are so fine." "Here," he said softly, his hand covering hers as he guided her finger along the words. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The warmth of his touch sent her heart fluttering. They spent an hour thus, his patient instruction matching her eager learning. When the bell rang for the evening meal, Marjorie insisted on visiting the kitchen first. "My lady, you needn't trouble yourself," the cook protested as Marjorie rolled up her sleeves to help with the bread. "Please," Marjorie said, already kneading the dough with practiced hands. "This brings me joy, and bread tastes better made with love." Her simple sincerity touched the cook, who slowly smiled. Word of Marjorie's continued humble service spread through the village. Old Thomas the cobbler spoke up in the tavern, remembering how she had tended his wife through winter fever without asking payment. Sarah from the mill recalled Marjorie sitting up 3 nights with her sick child. Gradually, some villagers began nodding to her again when she passed, but at neighboring estates, different whispers circulated. A common washerwoman, presuming to marry a knight? Lady Millicent sneered at her tea gathering. The girl must have bewitched him. One afternoon, Alaric and Marjorie walked in the rose garden again. The setting sun painted the flowers in shades of gold, and a gentle breeze carried their sweet perfume. "You've brought light back to this place," Alaric said softly, turning to face her. His hand rose to cup her cheek, and Marjorie's breath caught as he leaned closer. How touching! Geoffrey's mocking voice shattered the moment. He emerged from behind a hedge, his smile sharp as a blade. "Teaching the washerwoman to play at being a lady? Those rough red hands tell the truth of what she is." Marjorie instinctively tried to hide her work-worn hands in the folds of her dress, but Alaric caught them in his own. "These hands have saved lives," he said firmly, his thumb stroking across her calloused palm, "including mine. They are beautiful, because they are kind, Geoffrey's face twisted with scorn. The Montfort contract? Good evening, cousin. Alaric cut him off coldly. We were just leaving. Later that night, alone in her chamber, Marjorie sat by candlelight with the psalm book in her lap. Her fingers traced the worn leather cover, remembering the warmth of Alaric's hands guiding hers across the pages. Hope bloomed in her heart like the garden roses, even as doubt whispered that she could never truly belong in his world. She opened the book to their lessons page, carefully sounding out the words. They had read together, "The Lord is my shepherd, ... Her heart fluttered at the memory of almost kiss, even as uncertainty gnawed at her peace. The late summer rain pelted the carriage windows as it lurched along the muddy road to York. Inside, Marjorie gripped the leather strap hanging from the ceiling, her knuckles wide as their conveyance tilted precariously. Sir Alaric steadied her with a gentle hand. "We shall need to slow our pace," he called to the driver through the window. "The axle groans with each turn." "Aye, my lord," came the muffled reply. "These rains have turned the king's highway to soup." Marjorie's stomach churned with each jolt. After 7 days of travel, her bones ached from the constant motion. Yet her discomfort paled beside her worry about their reception in York. "Do you truly believe the steward will hear us fairly?" she asked. "Lord Pembroke is known for his justice," Alaric assured her, though his own expression betrayed concern. The truth of Geoffrey's deception will not escape his notice. The journey that should have taken 5 days had stretched longer due to flood roads and a cracked wheel that required repair at a village smithy. Now, as York's towers finally came into view through the dreary mist, both travelers sighed with relief. The steward's hall bustled with petitioners when they arrived. Geoffrey de Morville was already there, having ridden ahead on horseback. He stood with his usual artificial smile, though his eyes glittered with malice. "Cousin," he greeted smoothly, "I trust your ... delayed journey was pleasant." Before Alaric could respond, a herald announced Lord Pembroke's entrance. The steward, a man with silver-streaked hair and keen eyes, took his seat upon the carved wooden chair of authority. Alaric stepped forward, Marjorie a respectful pace behind. "My lord steward," he began, "I come to dispute a marriage contract that bears my signature, a signature I contend is false." For the next hour, evidence was presented. The alleged contract was compared with genuine documents bearing Alaric's hand. A scribe who supposedly witnessed the signing admitted, under close questioning, that Geoffrey had paid him to lie. Geoffrey's face grew darker with each revelation. When the steward called forth a paper merchant who confirmed selling the distinctive parchment to Geoffrey, parchment dated after the contract was supposedly signed, Geoffrey's composure finally cracked. "You cannot believe this common doxy over a son of the de Morville line," he burst out, pointing at Marjorie. "Silence." Lord Pembroke's voice cracked like a whip. "The evidence speaks clearly. This contract is void, forged by your own hand. You shall be fortunate if further charges are not pursued." Geoffrey stormed from the hall, leaving a wake of whispers. The steward turned to Alaric and Marjorie with softened eyes. "You are free to wed, provided proper banns are read in your parish, church, or a special license obtained. Go with God's blessing." The return journey, though still hindered by poor roads, felt lighter. In the quiet hours of travel, Marjorie and Alaric shared tales of their younger days. She spoke of gathering herbs with her mother, learning which plants could heal and which could harm. He told her of his first fumbling attempts at swordplay, earning more bruises than victories. "My father insisted I learn Latin before I could mount a horse," Alaric recalled, smiling at the memory. "I thought it terribly unfair at the time." "My father taught me to read the weather in the clouds," Marjorie responded. "Though I suspect your Latin proves more useful at court." "Perhaps. But your knowledge has saved more lives than my conjugations ever shall." 4 days passed in such gentle conversation, punctuated by stops at coaching inns where curious eyes followed the unlikely pair. Finally, as dawn broke on Sunday morning, the familiar bells of Wycliffe Church pealed across the misty fields. Their carriage rolled to a stop before the manor gates. Alaric descended first, turning to offer Marjorie his hand. As she stepped down, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the courtyard. Victory was theirs, yet both knew that Geoffrey's defeat would not end all opposition to their union. Some wounds of pride and prejudice would take longer to heal than any muddy road to mend. The church bells continued their song as they walked toward the manor, tired but triumphant, ready to face whatever challenges still lay ahead. Together, the fading sunset cast long shadows through the stained glass windows of Wycliffe's parish church. Marjorie Holt knelt before the altar, her rough woolen skirts pulled around her on the cold stone floor. The scent of beeswax candles and aging wood filled the empty church as she bowed her head in prayer. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her fingers intertwined tightly, "grant me the strength to face what comes tomorrow. The first reading of the BINS. Her voice trembled with equal parts joy and fear. The church stood, silent save for the gentle flutter of her breath and the distant cooing of doves in the bell tower. Tomorrow would mark the first step toward her marriage to Sir Alaric, a union that still seemed more dream than reality. Yet the weight of disapproving stares and whispered accusations pressed heavily upon her shoulders. Behind her, footsteps echoed on the flagstones. "Time to close up for evening, Miss Marjorie," the elderly sexton called softly, his keys jingling. "Yes, thank you," she replied, rising slowly. Her knees ached from the hard floor, but her heart felt lighter for the prayer. The walk back to the manor passed without incident, though she noted how the villagers hurried inside their cottages as she passed, doors closing firmly behind them. The sun had fully set by the time she reached her chamber, where a single candle burned low. Sleep had just begun to settle over her when the thunder of boots in the corridor jolted her awake. Her door burst open with a crash that sent her bolt upright in bed. 3 soldiers stormed in, their faces hard in the guttering candlelight. "Marjorie Holt," the lead soldier announced, "you are under arrest for theft and witchcraft." "What?" She scrambled from the bed, clutching her night rail close. "There must be some mistake. Search her belongings," the soldier commanded. One of his men appended her small chest of clothes, while another yanked the blankets from her bed. "Here." The soldier held up a silver chalice, its surface gleaming accusingly in the dim light. "Found among her things, just as was reported." Marjorie's blood ran cold. "That is not mine. I have never seen it before." But her protests fell on deaf ears as rough hands seized her arms. She caught a glimpse of Geoffrey de Morville satisfied smirk in the doorway before she was dragged from the chamber. "Sir Alaric," she cried out as they hauled her down the corridor. "Please, someone fetch Sir Alaric." The night air bit through her thin nightclothes as they marched her across the manor yard to the village jail. The stone walls rose dark and forbidding before her. Inside, the guards threw her into a tiny cell barely large enough to lie down in. "Comfortable quarters for a witch," one guard sneered, slamming the iron door. "I am no witch," Marjorie said firmly, though her voice shook. "And I have stolen nothing." "That's not what they're saying in the village," another guard taunted. "They say you must have used dark magic to enchant Sir Alaric. How else could a common washerwoman turn a noble knight's head?" Their mocking laughter echoed down the corridor as they left her alone in the darkness. Dawn's weak light had barely begun to seep through the high window when she heard familiar bootsteps approaching. Sir Alaric's face appeared at the cell door, his expression thunderous. "This is Geoffrey's doing," he growled. "The chalice was planted. I know it in my bones. The law demands a trial. the village bailiff said from behind him. Even you cannot override that, my lord. Then I shall prove her innocent, Alaric declared. His eyes met Marjorie's through the bars. Hold fast, my love. I will not rest until you are free. But as the day wore on, more whispers reached her cell. The villagers, once merely suspicious, now seemed convinced of her guilt. No simple woman could rise so high without dark help, she heard them say as they passed the jail. She must have bargained with the devil himself. Night fell again, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that made Marjorie shiver in her thin garments. Rats rustled in the moldy straw that covered the floor, their tiny eyes gleaming in the darkness. Alone in her misery, she clasped her hands together and bowed her head. Lord, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the scurrying of tiny feet. Thy will be done. The dawn bells of Wycliffe tolled mournfully as guards led Marjorie from her cell. Heavy iron chains bound her wrists, the cold metal biting into her flesh. Her once clean skirts dragged through the muddy streets as she stumbled forward, her head bowed against the growing crowd's hostile stares. Witch! Someone shouted from the gathering throng. Common trash reaching above her station. Rotten vegetables splattered near her feet. The guards tightened their grip on her arms, half dragging her toward the courthouse. Through tear-blurred eyes, Marjorie caught glimpses of faces she had known all her life, women whose children she had nursed through fever, men whose shirts she had washed clean week after week. Now they turned from her in scorn or joined the jeering mob inside the courthouse. Smoke from rushlights cast dancing shadows on the oak-paneled walls. Geoffrey de Morville stood near the judge's bench, his expression one of false concern as he adjusted his fine velvet doublet. The gallery quickly filled with nobles and villagers alike, all craning their necks for a better view of the spectacle. Bring forth the first witness, the judge commanded, his voice echoing in the crowded chamber. A trembling maidservant approached, her eyes downcast. Marjorie recognized her as one of the newer kitchen helps at the manor. The girl's voice quavered. As she spoke, I saw her, Your Honor. Late at night, she would whisper strange words Sir Alaric's wine cup. The maid wrung her hands, and after, he was different. Like one enchanted. Geoffrey stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on the maid's shoulder. Thank you for your courage in speaking truth, he said, though Marjorie caught the glint of coins passing between them as the girl hurried away. More witnesses followed, each tale more outlandish than the last. The baker swore he had seen Marjorie dancing with demons in the moonlight. A stable boy claimed she had turned his master's milk sour with a glance. Through it all, Geoffrey orchestrated the testimony like a puppet master, his satisfied smirk growing with each new accusation. She has bewitched Sir Alaric, Geoffrey declared to the court. How else could a common washerwoman turn the head of a noble knight? The contract with Lady Eleanor of Montfort lies in ruins, and with it, the future of our house. Marjorie's heart sank lower with each false word. The chains seemed to grow heavier, drawing her down into despair. Then, a commanding voice rang out across the courthouse. I will speak. The crowd parted as Sir Alaric strode forward, his boots striking the wooden floor with purpose. He wore no fine clothes today, only a simple leather jerkin and sword belt. His eyes blazed with righteous anger as he faced the judge. My lords, if you condemn this innocent woman, then I hereby renounce all claim to lands, wealth, and title. His voice carried to every corner of the hushed chamber. I would rather live as a common laborer with a wife of true heart than rule as a lord beside one chosen by lies and manipulation. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Ladies swooned, and men muttered in shock. Geoffrey's face twisted in fury as his carefully laid plans began to crumble. The judge raised his hands for silence, his expression troubled. These are grave matters that cannot be decided in haste. Before final judgment is rendered, I require proof of the accused's character." He fixed Marjorie with a stern gaze. "3 days hence, we shall hear testimony of her past deeds, be they good or ill. Until then, she returns to her cell." As the guards led her away, Marjorie caught one last glimpse of Alaric. Though pain lined his noble features, his gaze held steady with love and determination. The memory of his vow warmed her heart even as the cell door clanged shut behind her. Dusk painted the sky in somber purples beyond her tiny window. Marjorie huddled on her thin pallet, drawing her knees to her chest as rats scurried in the shadows. Yet even in her despair, she clung to hope, not just in Alaric's unwavering faith, but in the truth that lay in her own heart, whatever tomorrow might bring. She knew their love stood pure and untainted by any darkness their enemies might imagine. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse's high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above the packed benches. The second day of trial had drawn an even larger crowd than before, with both villagers and nobles pressed shoulder to shoulder in the stuffy chamber. Marjorie sat at the defendant's table, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale but composed. Geoffrey de Morville stood near the judge's bench, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he prepared to call his final witnesses. The scratch of the court scribe's quill filled the tense silence. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors creaked open. Father Anselm's weathered figure appeared in the doorway, his priest's cassock dusty from travel. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The elderly priest had been away visiting a sick parishioner in a neighboring village, and few had expected his return. "Your Honor," Father Anselm called out, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested, "I must speak on behalf of Marjorie Holt." The judge peered down from his bench. "Step forward, Father. The court will hear your testimony." Geoffrey's smirk faltered as Father Anselm made his way to the witness stand, leaning slightly on his walking stick. The priest's eyes, though gentle, held steel as he gazed around the courtroom. 3 years ago, he began, when the plague swept through Wycliffe, I witnessed true Christian virtue in its purest form. While noble houses barred their gates and wealthy merchants fled to their country estates, Marjorie Holt remained. The courthouse fell silent as Father Anselm continued, his voice thick with emotion. Day after day, she nursed abandoned children in the pest house. Night after night, she helped me bury the dead when no others would approach. Her hands, these same hands now accused of theft and witchcraft, cleaned festering wounds and spoon broth into fever-parched mouths. Murmurs spread through the gallery. Several villagers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, remembering those dark days. She asked no payment, the priest declared, seeks no glory. If there is any magic in Marjorie Holt, it is the magic of a heart that serves God through serving others. From the back of the courtroom, a woman's voice called out, "It's true." Mary Cooper, the baker's wife, stood trembling. She saved my Thomas during the fever. Sat with him 3 nights while I lay sick myself. Another voice joined in John the miller. I and my little Jane too. When all thought her lost, Marjorie kept vigil. More villagers rose, each adding their testimony. The potter spoke of Marjorie washing his dead wife's body for burial when others feared contagion. The carpenter's widow recalled her bringing bread to hungry children left parentless. Geoffrey's face had turned ashen. He stepped forward, trying to speak, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. The court has heard enough, the judge declared, his stern expression softening. These testimonies speak not of a woman dealing in dark arts, but of one whose Christian charity shams us all. The charges are dismissed. Marjorie Holt, you are free. Geoffrey turned to flee, but 2 guards blocked his path. Moreover, the judge continued, evidence suggests these accusations were falsely brought. Seize Geoffrey de Morville for the crime of perjury. The courthouse erupted in cheers as Jeffrey was led away in chains. Alaric vaulted over the wooden barrier separating him from Marjorie and rushed to her side. Tears streamed down her face as he clasped her hand in his. Together, they emerged into the bright sunlight outside the courthouse. The same crowd that had jeered days before now pressed close with smiles and blessings. The village children scattered flower petals in their path, and from the church tower, bells began to peal in joyous celebration. "God's truth will always prevail," Father Anselm said softly, appearing beside them with a gentle smile. Marjorie squeezed Alaric's hand, her heart too full for words, as the bells rang out their song of triumph over the village of Wycliffe. The morning sun painted rainbow patterns through the church's stained glass windows as villagers and nobles filled the wooden pews. The ancient stone walls of Wycliffe's parish church had never witnessed such a gathering silk-clad ladies seated beside wool-wrapped peasants, all come to witness a union that defied centuries of tradition. Sweet-smelling rushes and wildflowers carpeted the stone floor. Beeswax candles flickered on the altar, their gentle light catching the polished silver of the communion vessels. Father Anselm stood ready, his weathered hands holding his prayer book, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Sir Alaric de Morville waited at the altar steps, his ceremonial sword at his hip, dressed in deep blue velvet that matched the summer sky. His eyes remained fixed on the church's great wooden doors, anticipation evident in every line of his proud bearing. When the door swung wide, a collective breath was drawn. Marjorie Holt stood in the doorway, bathed in morning light. Her gown was simple undyed wool of the finest weave, adorned only with a belt of silver links and a crown of white roses. Yet her face glowed with such joy that she outshone the bejeweled ladies in the front pews. She walked slowly down the aisle, her steps steady despite the hundreds of eyes upon her. Village children scattered rose petals in her path. Old Thomas, the miller, wiped tears from his eyes, remembering how she had tended his grandchildren during the plague. Even Lady Beatrice, watching from the front row, found herself smiling at the quiet dignity of the woman who would become her sister Dot at the altar steps. Alaric extended his hand. Marjorie placed her fingers in his, the same strong fingers that had once pulled him from the river, now trembling slightly as they met his. Father Anselm's voice rang clear through the hushed church. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God. ... Alaric spoke his vows with the gravity of a knight's oath, his voice carrying to the rafters. "I, Alaric, take thee, Marjorie, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward." Marjorie's response was softer, but no less firm. Her simple words carrying the weight of truth that had sustained her through all trials. "I, Marjorie, take thee, Alaric, to be my wedded husband." As Father Anselm pronounced them man and wife, tears flowed freely throughout the congregation. Lady Beatrice rose from her seat, crossed to the newly wedded couple, and embraced Marjorie with genuine warmth. "Welcome, sister," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The celebration that followed in the manor's great hall broke with all convention. The long tables were arranged not by rank, but mixed freely, merchant beside knight, farmer beside lady. Wine flowed freely, and platters of roasted meats and fresh bread passed from hand to hand without regard for station. Children played together on the rush-strewn floor, while their parents shared tales and laughter. As evening drew near, Alaric and Marjorie slipped away to the quiet of the chapel. Hundreds of candles cast a warm glow over the stone walls, and the last rays of sunset turned the stained glass into jewels above them. They knelt together before the altar, their clasped hands a bridge between two worlds that had seemed forever separate. The chapel's peaceful silence wrapped around them like a blessing. In that moment, their union stood as living proof that love, nourished by virtue and sustained by faith, could indeed bridge the widest of society's divides. The light of the setting sun streamed through the rose window above, bathing them in colors of gold and crimson, a final benediction on their sacred union. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back. Tomorrow, the next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.